All right, now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce a woman who, my goodness, she's many things that we could say about her, so I'll get to it through it as quickly as possible. Expertise in the luxury real estate industry since 1999. She's an acclaimed real estate strategist and broker. She's overseen the management and supervision of luxury condominium sales and relations and human resources and public relations. She also was hand-selected by the ST Residential to be in charge of sales and marketing strategies for its nationwide portfolio. Currently, One World Properties has been awarded the exclusive sales and marketing of various pre-construction projects to the tune of $3 billion. And yes, a woman is behind this. That's freaking awesome, isn't it? That's a woman. She's lived in Broward County with her husband. She has 3 children, and she's pretty freaking gorgeous, too. So please welcome to the stage, Peggy Fucci.
Doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. Stand a little taller. Doesn't mean I'm lonely when I'm alone. What doesn't kill you makes a fighter. Morning.
Good morning, sassy ladies. I have to say, I actually ended up writing something last night. I actually was sharing with Aina when I saw her today that I typically don't write anything. I pretty much stand up and start talking, whether it's about my business or anything that I have in my path. And, you know, I think it was because I've never really shared this so much in the details of my life or my history in public. So I may get a little nervous, which is odd for me because I am never nervous. Because typically I'm in front of this many people but talking about business. So I think this is a little bit of a different arena, so I may get a little bit out of my comfort zone, but you may understand. I want to thank Dr. Elizabeth King for giving me the privilege of speaking in front of all of you today. I admire the passion and the strength to be able to dedicate her life to bringing people together, mainly to learn from each other. To think this started for me at a breakfast meeting in a local cafe here in Fort Lauderdale, speaking to someone who I think is in the hot seat today. And I shared some of the reasons with him behind the things I do and why I do them and kind of how I got here and how he got here. And so we started this conversation and he said, "Have you ever met Dr. King?" And I said, "No." She goes, "Well, that's definitely something you should do." And boy, he was right. It was a privilege to do that, and I'm very moved to be here. As I said, I wasn't really planning to write anything, but last night, I started with bullet points. And these bullet points, I realized several hours later, between putting my kids to bed, taking off my makeup, and of course trying to figure out what I was going to wear today, I put it all in writing. The first thing I did is I actually went in my closet and I searched for a plastic box that I keep a lot of little things over the years. And I was looking for something very specific. I was actually looking for a cutout of a newspaper that I kept when I was 14 years old. And I pulled out my planner, which was a gift back from 1988. And there was a quote in Spanish that I'm going to try to translate for you right now. And the quote said, "There was a man who was walking down the street, sad and very poor, lamenting his life, and all he had to eat were leaves and berries that he could pull from any tree that he could find along his way. And he said to himself as he walked, 'Could there be any person poorer or sadder than me?' As he looked back, he found his answer. There was another man he saw, walking behind and picking up all the leftovers he was throwing." That is an excerpt from an author from Spain called Pedro Calderón de la Barca, and the book is Life is a Dream. I cannot explain how powerful that quote was to me at that moment. You know, I stand here today with very well dressed and with a pair of nice shoes, and you know, I wake up rested after sleeping comfortably in my nice bed, next to my husband and kids, having dinner, prepare a delicious warm meal by my housekeeper now, and I'm talking about my husband about my day, which was extremely busy yesterday. I had meetings and had calls from Colombia, had meetings with people from Brazil, from Mexico. I sat along my team and planned the strategies of how we were going to travel to 10 different countries in the next 6 months, trying to do what I do. We run a company and we have over $1 billion today of a portfolio of real estate that we need to figure out what to do and how we bring people together and how we're going to sell it. Where did the time go? Every time I look at the things I do or what we have or the amount of sales that we make and the team that's around me, I say, isn't this crazy? I can't believe it. And there are several people, well, there's a friend of mine in the crowd who, has known me for 20 years, who I say to her all the time, I said, I can't believe how time has just passed so quickly. And how did this all happen? I don't even know. I can tell you today that my life has absolutely nothing to do with the life I was born into. I came from a very modest family in Peru. How modest? Well, I never knew growing up what it really meant to have your own bathroom. I actually lived in a community housing, which meant that 8 different families had to share a bathroom. I cannot tell you how creative everybody got. I was actually thinking about that last night, because you know how you try to put things behind in your mind so they don't affect you today. And I think that was being my expertise in life. I was raised by my grandparents who loved me very much. And despite the fact that my mother was only 16 years old when I was born, I felt very, very lucky, because despite our situation and how poor we were, and the only couple of shoes I had at that point, I was taught at a very, very early age to be thankful. My grandmother always pointed out to me the people who had it worse than we did. And it was true, there was somebody always worse. As I relive the memories of my childhood today, I remember I used to pretend to be making phone calls to different countries. I would imagine that I had like some secretary bring me a message from, somebody in Mexico or anywhere in the world. I had this amazing imagination. And today I think, was that imagination or was that visualization at such early age? I didn't know that at the time. But that's exactly what happens to me today, by the way, right? So, unfortunately for me, the days of my childhood were cut very, very short. I had to grow up very fast, and I had a grandmother who was such a strong woman who spent every day of her life teaching me to love and not to judge. Why, you may ask? Well, I had to witness my beautiful young mother destroy herself with drugs. I have countless memories of her just hurting herself, smoking, drinking, injecting herself. She would disappear for weeks at a time and then showing back up asking for forgiveness. And my grandmother, who always would take her back into our home and help her. The most powerful lesson I learned was at that age, growing up, watching all this. When my grandmother, after all the disaster was done, she would look at me straight in the eyes and say, "Don't you ever judge your mother. You are too little to understand. Instead, you should feel bad for her and always say a prayer." I was very strong, powerful words for someone who was suffering so much at that moment. Those were the days of my childhood, living in fear on how long was I going to take for my mother to fall again and for fall back again and show up and have these horrific conversations with me. I was going to have conversations with her. She would sit down next to me and tell me how she, wanted to kill herself because she was so unhappy. And I was 9, probably. She was very descriptive about what she wanted to do to herself and how she wanted to accomplish that. And I remember trying to think, I don't want her to suffer. So I remember giving her advice on, if you want to kill yourself, why don't you just take sleeping pills? You probably go to sleep, because to me, the important was that I didn't want her to suffer. I learned many valuable lessons in the process. I was able to recognize since day one for sure that I did not want to become like her. I was probably 8 or 9 years old at the time, and unfortunately, there was not much my grandmother could do for my mom. She was continuing to spiral downward. I have memories sitting in our dining room table helping my mother look or sort through little bags, which at the time I thought they were very cute, and later I found to understand they were just drugs that she was trying to sell. There were moments where she would come out very, very violent, and my grandmother used to hide me so she wouldn't hurt me. Tough times those were. My father, who of course was absent at the time, after a long paternity lawsuit, he recognized me as his daughter at the age of 3 years old. He was not really involved in my day-to-day life, but he did help us financially from time to time, or he would stop by with groceries. I remember him coming and carrying boxes of milk, and he would come and say hello. I guess it was tough for him at the time. He was trying to make a life of his own, and he was involved in the Peruvian military. Regardless of all the above, I was such a happy kid. I really was. I was extremely positive. I was a dreamer. I used to read books about the US and Europe and magazines, and I used to look at fashion, and I used to dream of one day visiting all the countries I used to read about. I loved stories of survival. There was nothing I loved more. I yearned for that story. I used to look for them in magazines. I used to read them all the time. Little did I know that it was my way of creating hope for myself, and that one day it was all going to be great help for me. By the time I was 11 years old, my mother started getting extremely violent, and my father at the time suggested that even though I did not know my family, his family, he wanted to send me to the United States to be with them in order for me to create an opportunity in the future. August of 1998, I left to a world so foreign to me, starting from the fact that now I can actually have a bathroom. I kept thinking about that. You know, for your own family, or maybe two, right? It was really difficult for me because I loved my grandmother so much, but she kindly convinced me that was the best move. It was a lot harder than I thought, though. I came to live with my grandparents who had no real bond, and they didn't with me. I ended up living with one of my aunts who had younger kids, and I was great help to her. I couldn't get enrolled in school because my documents were not in order. This world was not something that, even though it was so different from where I came from, it was missing the most important piece, which was that love that I had at once with my grandmother, even though poor. Several months later, my father came to visit and told me that not to worry, that he was actually going to quit, and he was going to come to the United States to be with me and my sister, who he was actually going through a divorce, so he was going to move to the United States. That conversation happened on July 4th of 1989. My father goes back to Peru, and unfortunately he was killed in a terrorist attack. I was devastated. Even though I was never raised by him, I knew that he was my hope. He was that little glimpse of light in my life that was going to pull me out of. My grandmother was old. She was 70 years old at the time. She was older. I had no future with her. I was devastated, of course, but even though that happened, his family here decided that the commitment to keep me here in the United States was not there anymore. Therefore, they decided to send me back to Peru with an expired visa and to a life that, of course, was nothing like I was already getting used to here. But to me, in my mind, all I wanted to go back to was home. I showed up at the airport in Lima to be with my grandmother. And it was so sad for me to leave the country opportunity that I wanted to so desperately be part of. But it wasn't my time yet. Little did I know that life was giving me a gift. I had the gift of spending the next 5 months with my grandmother, which would be her last. I had the most amazing conversations with her. It was as she was preparing me for what was coming. Not only my mother had turned into a monster, but she knew her heart was weak. She was sick. She was afraid of leaving me alone, reason why she held on as long as she could. I could have not been happier spending that time with her. There was a certain amount of fear associated with the thought of losing her and dealing with my mother, but she never allowed me to have any negative thoughts. In the contrary, she kept reinforcing and reinforcing the thoughts of compassion and forgiveness and willingness to succeed. I have big plans for you, she would say. You have to do everything I never did. You know, my grandmother never left Peru. She never saw any other country. She didn't know anything. You have in your heart and in your mind the ability to make things happen, she said. You don't need money to be classy. You don't need money to be educated. And most important is never to lose focus and to fight and continue fighting for what you want. No one can control your thoughts, she would say. Never, ever, ever stop dreaming and believing that you are extraordinary. I was 13 years old when these words were said to me. I often think how important the first years of our kids' lives are and how much something that you say to them at that point that you think they may not be listening, they are. This is not your world, she said. This is the world you were born into. And can I tell you a secret? She said. You have a chance to make your own world. Don't stop until you do that. 4 short months after my arrival, my dear grandmother passed away of a heart attack. She had witnessed a horrific incident from my mother, and her heart was just too weak to bear it. I cannot imagine the pain she felt at that moment, the pain of knowing that I was going to be left alone with my mother. I was only 14, and I had lost my father 6 months before that. That was my low point, I think. I felt like a zombie. I think that's the best word to describe it. There were no words to console me at that moment, and I spent a week at one of my aunt's houses until I figured out what they were going to do with me. I was mostly staring at a wall, not wanting to eat. I was trying to come to the realization that I was to create my own world. And for most people that started later in life. But for me, that started at 14. This was the moment that defined who I am today. Once I grieved, I only had one feeling in my body, which was, I am not afraid to fight. I will do everything in my power to make my father and my grandmother very proud. I thankfully was emancipated, which means I became a legal adult, which allowed me not to go into an orphanage, as from no one from my mother's family side wanted to keep me. They were all too embarrassed to be dealing with the daughter of a drug addict. My family that was overseas in the US, who really wanted to help, was really impossible at the time because I overstayed my visa, therefore almost deported back when I came back. But I gotta tell you that I had so many open doors. I had so many doors open for me during that time. I was living with different families 6 months at a time. I used to have a portable bed going from place to place. I used to work. I used to sell candy to be able to pay for my bus ride to school. I miraculously never starved. I never was abused. I was never offered drugs. I never did drugs. I never wanted to smoke, drink. I never wanted to do all those things because I only had one vision in mind. I did not want to be like my mother. Thankfully, my mother didn't know where I was, so I never crossed paths with her. I stayed in Lima for 2 years after that, and one of my aunts from my father's side was able to help me get out. I ended up coming to the United States 2 years later. During those 2 years that I stayed, I fought against all odds, and I couldn't continue to feel how thankful I was that people would open their home to me unconditionally. I had a small portable bed, as I said, and at night I remember putting a Walkman on. It was a little yellow case, and I used to put a Walkman. I loved music. And I used to stare and I used to the ceiling, and I used to visualize myself driving a car, having a beautiful home. And I used to say that I knew that this was temporary that one day I was going to accomplish all those goals. I came back to the US with a mission. I wanted to have a family of my own that would love me unconditionally. I wanted to do everything that my mother and my grandmother could never do, especially travel. What you live through and what you eat, my grandmother would say, no one can take away from you. I learned to embrace that. I went to do my junior and senior year of high school here to learn English, because I actually learned English when I was 17. I got my first job at Ross, I remember, in order for me to get braces, because I was very vain at the time. I needed to have braces. I graduated high school and I started working at Barnett Bank at the time as a teller. I always strived, I always said to myself, if I'm gonna get a job, I might as well be a great job. I always did everything with a lot of pride. I took pride in everything I did, whether it was to help someone or cash a check or anything that came my way. I got married very, very young, understandably so. I wanted to have a family of my own. I have a beautiful daughter from that marriage that did not last too long. He wasn't ready for marriage, and I really wanted a family. Shortly after I met my husband, my current husband, 5 years after that, we got married. That was almost 18 years ago. My kids are my life. I have 3 of those. I have a junior in college, a 13-year-old, and a girl who's 8. I have an incredible husband, a support system that has helped me and achieve everything I have today. While I was in banking, I learned about real estate, and it was an instant match for me. I love what I do with a passion. I wake up every day wanting to go to my office, to be with my team and making things happen. My industry is extremely competitive, but again, I believe in action, and we get it done. My definition of success is finding peace surrounded by love. There are not many things I'm afraid of, as you can tell, or as you can probably imagine, but I do believe in karma, and I believe to act accordingly. I've made mistakes, I'm sure many, along my way, but for sure that has allowed me to continue my growth. All the visions I had on how I saw myself as an adult have become a reality, and then some. I've had an amazing opportunities, but I've also worked against all odds to achieve it. My team, which some of them are here today, would probably agree with me. I'm like a speed train. I'm going at 100 miles an hour, and I have a lot of energy. But behind all of that, I'm someone who has fears, who cries, who's extremely sensitive, and who cares about a lot of people and others. I'm also very anxious, even though a lot of my team would never see that. I use meditation, acupuncture, yoga, and all those things to help me. Understandably so, I probably carry a lot of things in my past. I started One World Properties in 2008 in the middle of the real estate crisis, even though I've been practicing real estate for 20 years. And I've been able to work with some of the biggest companies in the United States. I have been across the table with billionaires, celebrities, dignitaries, you name it. That little girl from that community housing in Peru who was afraid followed her dreams. Those dreams who in a million years I could have imagined of what I have today. I'm here to tell you that it's possible. That whatever you may be going through, it all passes, all of it. It's what you do with the experiences that you live that matters in your life. You have the power to choose whether you are going to own them and move forward, or you are going to let the circumstances deviate your path. We all have the power to choose, no matter how difficult it seems. It all passes, and you get rewarded with the fruits of your labor. Today, I don't know if something in my message will inspire some of you. That is what it's all about, I think. This is what this is all about, this asset revolution. All of us have stories. It's about sharing with others our vulnerability. About 3 years ago, I decided to start sharing this, but I've mostly been done it with a group of young abused children emergency shelter, which I'm part of the board of. I started to feel the need to give back. Today, though, I can share with you that 11 years ago, I hired a team to help me find my mother. We succeeded, actually. We rescued her from the streets. We found her at a park with a dog named Whiskey and another one named Vodka. Yes. She was handicapped after an accident she had had as she was hit by a bus. After a severe treatment, my mother currently lives under my care in Lima and has been drug-free since. Yeah. Thanks. I take care of her because during all the time I spent developing the person that I am today, I never forgot that message from my grandmother who taught me, don't ever judge her and forgive her. I did that I did just that, which helped me through my life to not live with resentment and allowed me to live a life of emotional freedom. We are extraordinary people. We have it all within us to be able to survive, that and much more. I don't know what life has ahead of store for me. According to me, I have not stopped yet, but sometimes I wonder if this far has been enough. I'm going to close. I think there's a slide. There's another slide of one of my favorite things. This is one of my favorite quotes. No matter how you feel, get up, dress up, show up, and never, ever give up. Thank you.
Doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. Stand a little taller. Doesn't mean I'm lonely when I'm alone. What doesn't kill you makes a fighter. Footsteps even lighter. Doesn't mean I'm over, 'cause you're gone. What doesn't kill you makes you.
So how was that for the first speaker of the day? So she's beautiful, and she's successful, and she's all of that, and if you wouldn't have heard her story, you would have looked at her and said, oh, she's a beautiful, successful woman, and what a story.